All right, today we are digging into one of the biggest economic crashes in American history, the Panic of 1873. Now, this wasn't just some blip on the radar. This was a financial earthquake that completely reshaped the country for decades.
So, just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of what was happening, look at this number. In just the 7 years after the Civil War, America laid down an incredible 35,000 miles of new railroad track. That's enough to wrap around the entire planet almost 1.5 times. Insane. You have to picture it. This railroad boom was being fueled by a huge wave of investment. We're talking money pouring in from European banks, but also from everyday Americans who were getting their first taste of buying stocks and bonds. The promise was a new, connected, and incredibly prosperous nation.
How could a single bank failure completely derail not just an entire industry, but the whole country? Well, the story really begins with the very boom that felt so unstoppable.
Okay, so to really get the crash, you've got to understand the incredible, almost frantic economic boom that came right before it. It was wild. You see, railroads weren't just an industry. They were the engine of the whole post-war economy. The government was throwing money at them, and legendary banking houses like J. Cook and Company, this is the guy who financed the Union Army, they were packaging all this excitement into huge railroad projects and selling off the bonds like crazy. But just like any engine, you push way too hard for way too long, cracks start to appear. And underneath all this explosive growth, the foundations were getting seriously weak.
So you had a few things happening all at once, and it really was a perfect storm. You've got corruption scandals like Credit Mobilier making everyone nervous. You've got companies building way too much track into the middle of nowhere with no customers. And then, the real kicker, a huge chunk of the investment money was coming from Europe. So when the stock market in Vienna crashed, that river of foreign cash just dried up overnight.
What we're looking at here is a classic financial bubble. Bankers were holding on to these railroad bonds, borrowing short-term money, hoping the prices would just keep going up. And hey, if that sounds familiar, it should. It's almost the exact same risky game they played with mortgage-backed securities right before the 2008 crash. So this bubble, it didn't just slowly leak air. Oh no, it burst. And it all came down to one man and his bank, a bank everyone thought was too big to fail. And man, when it happened fast. On September 18th, J. Cook and Company, the most trusted bank in the country, just flat out declared bankruptcy. The shockwave was immediate. 2 days later, for the first time in its entire history, the New York Stock Exchange just shut its doors. The panic was officially on. And just like that, poof, the money was gone. People lost all faith, not just in the railroads, but in the entire banking system. The credit that was the lifeblood of the whole economy, it just froze solid. So we've seen the chaos on Wall Street, but what did this actually mean for regular people, for ordinary Americans? Well, it was an absolute nightmare. The scale of the collapse is just breathtaking. In only 2 years, 18,000 American businesses went under, and 89 of the nation's 364 railroads went bankrupt. The very engine of the economy had just seized up. For workers, it was a catastrophe. Unemployment shot up to a terrifying 14% across the country. And if you were in a major city like New York, it was even worse. A full quarter of the entire workforce, that's 100,000 people, had no job. This quote from a young Samuel Gompers, who would go on to be a huge labor leader, he really captures the feeling of the time. This wasn't just a recession. To people living through it, it felt like society itself was falling apart. The Depression kicked off years of social chaos. Tens of thousands of men, a lot of them Civil War vets, ended up homeless, wandering the country, where they were called tramps. And when the unemployed tried to protest for jobs, they were often met with extreme police violence. All that anger eventually boiled over into some of the most brutal labor strikes in all of American history. So this was a total disaster, right? Well, not for everyone. For a very small group of people who happened to be sitting on a lot of cash, this wasn't a crisis. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. See, the panic basically split the economy in two. On one side, you had all the smaller businesses that needed loans from banks to operate. When the credit froze, they got wiped out. But on the other side, you had industrial giants like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. They had their own massive cash reserves. For them, the panic wasn't a problem. It was a shopping spree. the panic essentially cleared the entire playing field. These industrial titans used the crisis to swoop in and buy up all their struggling competitors for pennies on the dollar. This was it. This was the moment of consolidation that created the massive monopolies that would define the entire Gilded Age.
But the impact went so much deeper than just the economy. The crisis also had a profound and frankly a tragic political consequence that would change the course of American history.
Here's the bottom line. The Panic of 1873 helped kill Reconstruction. With the North completely consumed by economic collapse, unemployment, and labor riots, the political will to keep protecting the rights of newly freed African Americans in the South just evaporated. That power vacuum allowed white supremacist groups to take back control, bringing one of America's most important political experiments to a tragic end.
And that's really the key takeaway from this whole thing. Financial crises are never just about numbers on a spreadsheet. They're about power. They reshuffle the entire deck. They create new winners and losers, and their aftershocks can define a country for generations. It really makes you wonder what we might be missing today.